There's Mike. There's Mike. All right. Did everyone get a handout? I think I got everybody. Wonderful. They'll go there for any latecomers. All right. Good evening. Sorry, I have been frantic. I'm going to try and focus here. If I seem miscombobulated at the beginning, stuff wasn't working. But it's working now, so praise the Lord for that. All right. We have been going through our book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and just enjoying ourselves. I don't know, I've been enjoying it. I've been reading through it and really studying it. And last week we had maybe a little bit heavier of a lesson. It was a little bit more kind of in-depth. But at the same time, I feel that it was good. Next week, I'm going to preface you for the end of the lesson. I didn't put, Karen already noticed. It's like, man, it was like 2 seconds she caught my error. On the bottom of your notes, I normally put the page to read through. The page for this week is page 168, in case I forget, page 168. If you're reading through the book, which is a lot of pages, if you know where we were last week. But that's because next week we're going to cover 2 lessons, like curriculum, 2 chapters in 1 week. All right, so I'm going to attempt to not make this series be like the eternal series that we never get done. And so there's a lot of content, and pray for me this week as I try to take those 2 lessons and combine it to 1. Because as you know, I struggle to do 1 lesson in 1 week, so we'll see how that works. But we're going to do that because the lessons are similar in nature to what we're going in their nature. So just in case I forget, I'll try to remind you at the end. All right. Key terms for this week. We only have 3. This actually is a shorter lesson, which, as Neva pointed out, just means I'm going to talk longer. But that's okay. So we have, first of all, we have the teleological argument in your notes there. The teleological argument. This is going to be the primary kind of topic for today, and it's also going to be kind of an idea that we kind of talk about in the next couple of weeks. The teleological argument is an argument for the existence of God based on evidence of order, purpose, and design in nature. If you remember, last week we talked about the cosmological argument, which is an argument basically that if the universe had a beginning, then therefore it must have had a beginner. This week we're going to talk about the teleological argument, which is an argument that basically states that if you look around us, obviously this is the 40,000-foot view of it, but if you look around us, the world around us has design. And specifically this week, we're going to talk about the cosmos, kind of in conjunction with last week. Next week, we're going to talk about kind of those 2 same concepts, kind of the beginning of life and the premise of design, but from a kind of a biological standpoint. So we're going to talk about next week we're going to talk about evolution and things like that next week. So this week we're going to talk about the teleological argument. Not to get ahead of ourselves, just so that you guys can emotionally prepare for that. I know that's always good. All right, next we have the anthropic principle. The anthropic principle. This is a scientific principle that states that the universe is extremely fine-tuned and designed specifically to support human life on Earth. And kind of beyond that, that if this fine-tuning was not there, life as we know it would not be here. Okay? So this principle, the anthropic principle, is a scientific principle that basically states that the universe is fine-tuned and designed specifically to support human life on Earth. And that if it wasn't, if we didn't have the anthropic principle, then we would not have life as we know it anyway. All right? And then lastly, our third is the anthropic constants. Anthropic constants. These are precise, interdependent environmental conditions or factors about the universe that permit life to exist on Earth. So they're interdependent environmental conditions. And again, we're going to talk about these throughout today's lesson. But what this is saying is that there are specific things that if they did not exist as they were, we would not have life on Earth, as we know it at least. All right. So we have the teleological argument. As we study this lesson, we'll see that the universe, or hopefully we'll see, that the universe is a highly complex design. All right, this is not something that was cobbled together. Tom did not design the universe, and that's a positive thing because if you've ever seen any of my Lego creations, you know that my skill is like baseline, you know? It's highly complex to the point that it points to a designer who is powerful, intelligent, and has a purpose to the universe. And again, as we've talked about in the last couple of weeks, if there is no creator, and we are just a product of random natural occurrences, then that means that there's no accountability. That means that there's no purpose. In which case, we might as well do whatever we want. We might as well just be happy and enjoy ourselves because there's no one to please. There's no one that has a desire for our lives. If we don't have a desire, then no one does. And so there's nothing above me to tell me that I should do X or Y because that's what I was designed for. The idea of a designer points us to this idea that this designer has a purpose for the universe. He created it for a reason. All right? And now there's all sorts of religious things we talk about in church on why God created the universe and what the reason was that he created man, for fellowship, for glory, for all of those things. But from a scientific viewpoint, it still is the same premise. Where, why did Henry Ford build the car? Like, he had a reason. Now, I might not have that reason correct, right? I might say, well, it's because he always wanted, a black carriage. And no, that's probably not the right reason. I might not have the right reason correct, but he did have a reason. And therefore, if there was a designer and he is knowable to us, then we can know that reason. So what do we know? What do we know about this teleological argument? What do we know? This is kind of review and kind of like what we're going to talk about today. What do we know? Well, we know that there is a vast universe around us. That the universe did not always exist. It had a beginning. The universe was finely tuned from the very beginning to support life. We talked about that a little bit last week. And that this fine-tuning is evidence of design, which then implies a designer. We're going to talk about the vastness of the universe, not in enough, it's an amazing thing how big the universe is. We talked about last week how the nearest star is 2 trillion miles away, and that if you were to go 5 miles per second, it would take you 200,000 years to get there. And if that's the case, then that means it's going to take you 200,000 years to get to that one and 200,000 years to get to the next one. And so we know that the universe is vast. We know that the universe, as we talked about last week, did not always exist because there's no material infinites. There's nothing infinite that we can touch. The universe was finely tuned. We're going to talk about that this week, and that therefore that this fine-tuning is evidence of design. This line of reasoning, this is not like the strict 3 points, but this line of reasoning is called the teleological argument. The word teleos is a Greek word that means design or purpose. All right? Design or purpose. It's a Greek word. All right. Wake up. There we go. I'm awake now. All right. Oh, back up. Don't look at that one. All right. So we always have our three points, right? Our 3 premises. It's not always going to be 3. There's arguments that have like 7 premises. But we have our 3 premises for today in the teleological argument. Premise 1, every design has a designer. We mentioned this last week. But no one walked by this building, as simple as this building is in reality. As simple as this building is, no one walks by this building and thinks that building just happened by accident, happened by chance. When we walk by a car, when you walk by anything that you experience in your life, it had a designer. So every design has a designer. Secondly, the second premise, the universe is a highly complex design. It's highly complex. If I were to ask you, how the sun works, I guarantee you that we would not have all the same answers, certainly. And at least some of us would be incorrect. Probably most of us, maybe all of us. We don't know, to be honest, if even like confident science is correct, right? We may be wrong. Science is always learning new things. So just because we think we even understand something doesn't necessarily mean we do. That means that we can look at the universe around us and we can say this is a highly complex design. So therefore, what's our conclusion? The universe has a designer. If the universe is a complex design, and even the most simple designs have a designer, then the universe must have a designer. Again, just as with the cosmological argument, the first premise is easily supported. I don't think there's anyone here that would sit here with me and argue that a design has a designer. My son, he creates with his Legos, you know, these little TIE fighters from Star Wars. And they're like 4 blocks, right, things. And they're like 3 blocks total, right? And he makes like 100 of them, and he makes like a whole fleet, I guess it would be, and so that he can fight them all together. Even 3 blocks of Legos put together is a design and had a designer. It doesn't happen by accident, okay? So therefore, since the first premise is the one that's like we can all agree on and pretty much everyone will, I say pretty much because there may be a person out there that doesn't. But that means the premise 2 is the one that we kind of have to look to. If premise 1 is true, then how do we prove premise 2? So to put it simply, what is the anthropic principle? Well, the anthropic principle states that the earth appears to have been designed specifically to support human life. All right, this term is also a Greek term from the word anthropos, which means mankind. Okay, mankind. In theology, we have anthropology, which is the study of man as it relates to the Bible. Any small variation in a number of different factors, all right, could alter the balance of life on our planet and end it. All right, we talk about this all the time. Like, you hear this. I mean, we have like climate change, right? And that's what they're saying, right? Even the smallest temperature variation can cause the end of life on our planet. Yet, for some reason, we think that, let's just take temperature, that by accident it happened to be at the right one so that we could come about in the first place, right? So some of these factors that we've talked about, and we mentioned this in our terms, in our key terms, they're called constants. They defy any chance explanation. For example, if the gravitational force that we experience today was altered by any one part in 1 in 10 to the 40th power. Now, I understand maybe math is not everyone's thing, but that's 1 part in 10 with 40 zeros after it. Okay? That's a big number. All right? 1 part in 10 with 40 zeros after it. Our sun would not exist. This would be the equivalent of taking a tape measure, stretching it across the known universe, okay? That not this room, the known universe, picking an inch space on that tape measure and getting it right. And that being exactly where the constant should be. That'd be the equivalent. Now, if I were to take a tape measure and stretch it across this room and say, Brother Steve, I picked a spot on this tape measure. I want you to pick the same spot, and he got it within an inch, we'd all be impressed, wouldn't we? Now do that across the known universe, 14 billion light years, okay, within an inch. That's impressive. That's impressive. That is either a miracle of chance or someone picked that spot for it to be. The reason that we say this, the reason that we go on this, you know, we don't, like let's just say we're going on a trip. We often don't think about who designed the plane, right? We don't think about that it was designed with exacting precision, aerodynamics, engineering standards, right? Like, we don't think about that when we hop on a plane. Maybe you do. You're like, I'm terrified of flying, and I absolutely think about that every time I get on a plane. But if any one of those many standards were wrong, that plane flight would end in tragedy. And we see this, like when planes crash. It happens where there's just one little thing And the whole flight ends in tragedy. So there's only three possibilities for for the apparent fine-tuning of the universe. We have chance, okay? We have chance. We have physical necessity. Okay, so chance is that this all just happened by accident, okay? Chance is not a force that acts, okay? Chance is not something that acts. Chance is not a thing. It's not a law, all right? We say, like, if I flipped a coin, you would say there's a 50-50 chance, right? But really, chance is not making that be 50. Chance is not a thing that is making that 50-50. Really what it is we're describing an unknowable aspect of that, right? We don't know if it's going to flip heads or tails, so therefore it is a 50-50 chance. If I were to look at all the principles, if I were to look at the strength of the flipper, right, the location that he hit it, if I were to figure out any number of wind variables and weight variables and gravitational pulls and all these different variables, I probably could figure out the exact way it's going to land, probably. But because I'm not going to do all that work, I say, yeah, there's a 50-50 chance. So when I say chance, when we use that terminology, chance, what we're saying is that we don't know the whole picture, and so therefore we can't make a judgment on what happened. So it's equivalent to an accident, right? If I flip a coin and it lands heads, and then I flip it again, I say it's going to be heads, and I catch it and it's heads, I had no control over that. It's a chance, right? It was an accident, all right? And that's what we mean by chance. Number two is that it's a physical necessity. In other words, when the world was created, when the world came, let's say, came into being, there was no other option except that it happened exactly the way it was supposed to. It's a physical necessity. In other words, gravity had to be this way. There was no other option. If gravity exists, it must be at the exact rate that it is, which we don't observe. This is not something that we observe. We observe that the physical laws could be different. Why is the speed of light the speed of light? Well, does it have to be that, or could it be something else, but it's just not? It's what it is, right? So physical necessity or design. Those are our only three options. It's either an accident, it had to be that way, there was no choice, regardless if someone made it or didn't, or it was designed. So here, let's just talk quickly about 5 anthropic constants. First of all, oxygen level. Now, in the book, they recommend and they compare this to the Apollo 13 mission. So if you're interested in this kind of demonstrated, you can go watch the movie Apollo 13 and kind of see this. But basically, they compare Earth to that flying capsule. And just like that capsule, we're flying through space, and we have no control over really anything that's going on our little planet. And so here we see this first anthropic constant, which is our oxygen level. If our oxygen level was not what it is, that we would, like it's 21%, I believe, is what it is. Am I right? Neva, do you know? Okay, all right. I believe it's 21%, but I might be wrong. I believe it's 21% and then like 70% nitrogen, and then, there you go. I believe it's 21%, if I remember my science teacher correctly. I could ask him. I'll send him a text after. He's still alive. He's still around. He's almost not. He's old. But 21%. If it was greater than 21%, because oxygen is what kindles our fires, we would see fires just burning out of control. If it were lower than 21%, we would struggle breathing and suffocate. It has to be where it is. And again, when astronauts go into space, this is a thing that they deal with. They don't want, the first capsules, they pumped them full of pure oxygen, and they blew up. It happened, right? Like, pure oxygen's not good. You don't want pure oxygen. You have to have the right mix, so oxygen level. Secondly, atmospheric transparency. Earth's atmosphere has exactly the right density so that enough sunlight shines through it to support life, but not so much sun that we become irradiated. Right? We have things like the ozone layer. I have windows in my house. And I don't live in a box. I have windows in my house. I realized how dumb that sounded once I said it. And these windows in my living room, they're clear plexiglass windows, and they just roast my living room. In this Florida sun, they just roast my living room. But I talked to my landlord, and I'm like, well, I do like the sunshine. You know, I don't like darkness. I don't want to live in a box. I want to live in a nice thing with some sunshine, you know, and vitamin D and all that. It's good. So what you have this balance, right, where it's like I don't want heat to come in, so I need to block out light, but I don't want to live in a closet, right? There's that balance. Well, the Earth is similar. If the atmosphere was not the right transparency, not enough light would come through. And that wouldn't be good. We wouldn't heat the Earth properly. But if there's too much, right? We look at Venus, with the planet Venus, and the atmosphere on Venus is so dense that it traps all the heat inside, and it's like the surface of Venus is like 900 degrees. Like, it's way too hot. Obviously, we cannot live in 900 degrees. Are you kidding me? Everyone complains about it's like 89, and people are complaining. Imagine if it was 900 degrees, right? We can't live. So atmospheric transparency, it's vital to life on Earth. The atmosphere has to be correct. It is 21%. See, I knew. Yeah, approximately. I only deal in approximates. I'm not that smart, only approximates. That way I could be right if I said 25. Next, the Moon-Earth gravitational interaction. There's lots of words. Moon-Earth, I think, is the only blank, though. Gravitational interaction. If the moon's gravity were stronger, the atmospheric effects would cause massive damage. The moon pulls on the Earth. Right? That's why we have our tides. The moon pulls on the Earth. If the gravity were strong, if gravity, the force of gravity were stronger, then the moon would pull on the Earth more because gravity is stronger. And that would cause horrible things. That would cause increased tides. That may cause the moon to get pulled into Earth, which, as you can imagine, is a negative thing. We don't actually want the moon to come hit the Earth. That would be bad. Right? If it was less, the moon would get launched away. Right? The moon's spinning, and it would get launched away if gravity were less. And so the weather cycle would cease to function. We wouldn't have weather, we wouldn't have the tides that we have, and that would also, again, be a negative. We require these things to be correct. We require them to be correct. Next, we have the carbon dioxide level. Carbon dioxide level, which we hear about all the time. All the time. The right level of carbon dioxide, without the right level of carbon dioxide, the air would be poisonous. We can't just have too much carbon dioxide. We're having issues with this, I don't know if you've seen on the news, because of these face masks, right? Everyone's wearing face masks, right? And it's increasing the amount of carbon dioxide, and it's causing problems, all right? We need oxygen, right? We need oxygen. You can't have too much. But if it's too little, then the plants wouldn't live. And we also need plants. So it can't just be off. It's not okay to just be wrong. All right? All of these things, it's not just okay to be wrong. We can't just say like, oh, well, it's no big deal. It's like, no, it's a big deal. It's a big deal if these things are not correct. And finally, gravity. If the force of gravity were altered even slightly, life would cease to exist. Too much and we would all be crushed. Okay? We don't want to be crushed. Too little and planets couldn't exist. All right? Everything would have fallen in on itself at the beginning, or it would be launched out. Astrophysicist Hugh Ross has calculated the probability that all these and other constants, he calculates 122. Okay, so we went over 5. He calculates 122 for them all to exist for any of the 10 to what they estimate 10 to the 22. That's 10 with 22 zeros after it. Yeah, see, I know that, right? Any of them. And there's... So his calculation comes up to be that he estimates that there would be a 1 in 10 with 138 zeros after it. There is, in the known universe, 10 to the 70 atoms in the universe. Okay? So the atoms, which is one of the smallest particles that we know. In the entirety of the universe, there is 10 with 70 zeros after it. What he's saying is that, effectively, you're taking a marker, you're putting it on one atom in the known universe, mixing them all back up and saying, pick the right one. Actually, 2 universes. That's insanely small odds. Go play the lottery if you're willing to play those odds, right? Like, that's no big deal at all. In effect, that means that there's 0 chance. There's 0 chance, effectively, that this happened by accident. That there wasn't somebody who intentionally put gravity at the right way, that gave us oxygen on our planet, that put the sun where it's supposed to be. You know that we need Jupiter? We need Jupiter. If Jupiter wasn't there, Earth would be bombarded by asteroids. Jupiter, because it's so big, sucks in all the asteroids and meteors and everything flying around the universe. It gets sucked into Jupiter. Jupiter helps us out a lot. We don't think about Jupiter existing as helping us on Earth, but it does. And there's probably more than these 122 things that we don't even know. That things that have to be correct for life to exist on Earth. Atheist Steven Weinberg said, life as we know it would be impossible if any one of several physical quantities had a slightly different value. I mean, if I say a slightly different value, I don't know, in my head I think like, well, what's a slightly different value? That's like, a cup of sugar, to like, I don't know, a cup and a quarter, right? A cup and an eighth, right? It's a slightly different value. It's not that much. This would be like if you filled all of Earth with sugar and you pulled out a grain. That's the slight difference. One too many, right? That's the difference. So atheists have come up with all sorts of very interesting hypotheses. And I'm not going to do their hypothesis' justice, okay? And I acknowledge that. If there's an atheist that is going to see this in the future, I am not saying that I am going to 100% accurately convey what they believe. But they've come up with multiple hypotheses, one of which is the multiple universe theory. I believe it was Hawking that came up with this theory. He basically said, well, it's so obvious that it's such a particular design choice that therefore there must be an infinite number of universes that are out there, each with varying degrees of gravitational pull and speed of light and oxygen levels and all these different things, infinite numbers of them. So one of them is all right except one, so life doesn't exist. The next one is all right except a different one, so that one doesn't exist. And so there's just an infinite number, and in this infinite number that exists, there's the chance that we live on the one that worked out. That's what he believes. So even proponents of this theory, and I've heard this from multiple people, admit that it has its problems. Okay? In 2006, Alexander Vilenkin admitted that even if multiple universes exist, the entire collection of known multiple universes, the whole infinite, which again, we talked about last week, if the universe is physical, which we all agree it is, there cannot be an infinite number of physical objects, right? We talked about that last week. So there can't be an infinite number of universes. That would be an actual infinite, and that cannot exist. But even if we assume it does, in his book, Alexander Vilenkin's book, he said, it is said that an argument that is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man, right? An argument convinces a reasonable person. A proof will convince even an unreasonable person. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. In other words, even if there was a multiple, infinite number of universes, who started them? They had to start somewhere. So even if this was true, that doesn't prove that God doesn't exist. All it proves is that God made an infinite number of universes. Okay? That's all that proves. Or maybe it's not that there are multiple infinite number of universes. Maybe life on Earth was just inevitable. It couldn't be changed. It couldn't be helped. It was just an inevitable outcome of an existing world. So, while it's certainly true that if the conditions were different, and I mentioned this at the beginning, we wouldn't be here to know about them because life wouldn't exist for us. It is theoretically possible that life in some form could exist, right? We've discovered even on our planet that down, you go to the bottoms of the ocean, and there's these sulfur deposits, and there's little worms that live on sulfur. What if that's life, right? Those little worms are life. Well, what if instead of oxygen we had sulfur? We would all be dead. But maybe those little worms, that life would exist. Maybe life was just inevitable, and it doesn't matter what universe, some life would come about. Why? The problem is this doesn't explain the universe and why it is the way it is. This just makes the proposition that if it were different, then life may still exist. Well, yeah, it may, but why is it the way it is? Right? Why is it this way? It still doesn't answer that question. It evades that question. It's like a good politics answer, right? It's like, yeah, exactly. All right? Where it doesn't answer the question, like, why is it the way it is now so that we can exist, so that we can observe the existence of our world? Why is there any universe at all? It doesn't answer that question. Why are these extremely fine-tuned conditions for life, and how did they arise? Why are they the way they are, and how did they arise? The most reasonable conclusion about the apparent design of the universe is that a designer is responsible for it. We can jump all around. We can make arguments. You can have proofs. But like he said, an argument will convince a reasonable man. A proof will convince an unreasonable man. But ultimately, have you ever heard, the simplest answer is probably the right one? And so here's the thing. When we use the phrase anthropic principle, we mean that the universe is precisely made to enable mankind to exist because a designer made it that way. So some claim that another form of life would have arisen had the conditions been different, but that is a faith-based assertion. That's faith. It's not my faith, but it is faith, right? We're saying that, if it was different, then a different kind of life would have, okay, maybe, but you believe that by faith. You don't believe that because of any facts that you see around us. You believe that by faith. You believe it by faith that the universe is the way it is by accident. They believe that by faith. And that is the point of this series. It takes a lot more faith than to just believe in the simple conclusion that a designer made it the way it is. If I were to walk into my room and I were to see 1,000 of those little Lego TIE fighters, 3 bricks each, on the ground, I would not assume that they got there by accident. I would assume my son built them and dumped them on the floor, right? That's what I would assume. And even though I would disagree with him dumping them on the floor, he had a reason for it. I don't have to understand that reason, right? I don't have to like it, but there was a reason. It was an epic battle. So none of those claims or assertions account that why the universe requires all these constants, regardless of whether life exists in it or not. We actually haven't gotten to the proof for life. We're going to talk about that next week, right? We haven't gotten to life yet. But life could not exist in any shape as we know it today without it being the way it is. So what does the Bible then say about the teleological argument? Our galaxy is enormous. Our galaxy, this is not the universe, our galaxy is enormous. There are about 100 billion stars in our galaxy, each separated by an average distance of around 30 trillion miles. Before the scientists confirmed this through scientific observation, the Bible directed us to look to the heavens for proof of intelligent design. That we have this in Scripture. Psalm 19, verse 1 and 3 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech." We see the sun rise, and the next sun comes up. That utters speech to us. It speaks to us. "And night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard." I don't care if you don't speak English. You may never see a Bible, but when the sun rises and the sun sets and the moon comes and the moon sets, we look up in the heavens and we see the hundreds of billions of stars. Wow, that declares God's glory. That tells us that there's a designer. That's what the Bible says. It's obvious to anyone who looks up. Anyone who looks up. So this is what the Bible says about the teleological argument, that it's obvious. That it's very obvious. It says in, I think it's verse 4, "Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle. In what? In the stars. He hath set a tabernacle, a dwelling place for the sun, which is as a bridegroom coming out of its chamber and rejoices as a strong man to run his race. His going forth is from the end of the heaven, and his circuit to the ends of it, and there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. There's nothing that the sun doesn't touch, right? What an amazing thought. Isaiah 40 says this. It says, to whom then will you liken me? Or shall I be equal, saith the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high, and behold, who hath created these things? What things? If you're lifting up your eyes, the stars. It says that bringeth out their host by number. He calleth them all by names, by the greatness of his might. For he is strong in power, and not one faileth. No stars fail, right? They burn out. They don't fail. He holds them there. The Bible talks about this. Pastor and I were discussing this week because of the kids' class, and how it's amazing to think that in the Bible, God covers the creation of the multiple trillions of stars that are out there in 5 words. He spends a lot of time talking about the plants and the animals. He spends the next 66 books talking about man, right? And he made the stars also. No big deal for God. Here it says he calls them by their names. So not only did he make them, he named them all. You know, Adam named the animals, but God named the stars. Kind of cool thing to think about. We serve this God. And so when we think about the number of stars that are equal to all the grains on the seas, on the grains on the seashores of all the beaches on earth, the Bible uses the seemingly limited expanse of the universe to help us grasp what it means that God and his characters are infinite in scope. Oh, hold on. I put my notes on the wrong page. That's a great slide, but you have to wait for it. So in light of all the evidence for design in the universe, atheists have to have a lot of faith to reject it. They have to have a lot of faith to reject it. The author of our series, Frank Turek and Norman Geisler, they're the authors, they say in one of their other books, I believe, that this blind faith of the atheist reveals the rejection of a designer is not a head problem. It's not as if we lack evidence or an intellectual justification for a designer. On the contrary, the evidence is impressive, right? We make an argument and it convinces a reasonable man. The evidence is impressive. What we still have here is a will problem. Some people, despite the evidence, don't want to admit that there's a designer. In fact, one critic of the anthropic principle admitted recently that his real objection was totally emotional. He rejected the fact that God exists. It was totally emotional because the principle, quote, smells of religion and intelligent design. Just don't like it. It bothers me. I don't like it. And here's the thing. We're going to talk about this later in the series. God's okay with you rejecting him. This is weird for a Christian to say, but it's true. God doesn't force anyone to stay in eternity with him if that doesn't want to be there. And when we talk about people and they talk to us, Pastor mentioned about going to heaven, and now heaven this morning, he talked about heaven is a, how did he put it? Heaven is not the gift, God is the gift, right? We get to be in the presence of God, and that is what makes heaven heaven, is that we get to be in the presence of God. Why, then, would God force someone who didn't want to have any part of him on earth to be in his presence? Like, that's the question, right? God doesn't, if heaven is an eternity with God, that is the gift, that is the benefit, then why would he force anyone who isn't present with him here to be present with him there, right? That's the logic there. And so we see that atheists come to an emotional principle. So we have this thought here. The Bible's use of a seemingly infinite expanse in the universe helps us to grasp what it means that God and his characteristics are infinite in scope. When we look at the heavens and we think about how limitless the sky is, the stars are, and God says, compare me to that. And you know what? That is not enough for our God. Our God is infinite, and the universe is not. But because my brain can't really grasp infinite, God says, look at the stars. Look at the stars. That's the closest thing you're going to get. And the Bible says in Genesis 1 that the stars were made for signs. They were made for signs. In other words, they show us who God is. So only the heavens come close to giving us this picture. The night sky is incredibly, immeasurably large and full of carefully designed order, something that things that we're just discovering now, like the Hubble Space Telescope, has shown us to see. All right? So this is it. See, look at this. We're done. Yeah, we listened. You guys, I couldn't speak this quickly if you didn't listen that fast. Astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing, one with a very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the right conditions required to permit life, and one which has an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan. And that's the point. When we look at the heavens, right? David said it. When I consider the heavens, the works of thy hands, the sun, the moon, and the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man? Like, I am nothing compared to all that. I taught, in closing, just to kind of give a picture of the vastness of space, because it's hard for us to understand, right? Like, it's hard for us to understand. We see pictures and we see like the Earth and the moon, and they're like right next to each other. You know, it takes 3 days to fly there. It takes 3 days to fly to the moon from the Earth. Like, it's a long trip. It's like 270,000 miles or something. Or it's a long trip. If you were to take the Earth and condense it down to the size of a basketball, right, this big, the moon, conveniently, would be about the size of a tennis ball. If I were to hold the basketball here, the moon would be 30 feet away. That's how far away it is, 30 feet. That's far. That's some distance, right? It's not like sitting like here. The space station would be less than a millimeter above its surface. That's where the space station sits. We can't even imagine. At that scale, I think the Earth, or the sun is like 2.5 miles away. It's huge. You know that every single planet in our solar system can fit between the Earth and the moon. That's how far away they are. Like Jupiter, Saturn, you can put them all next to each other. That's how much space is there. There's a lot of space. Space is a lot of space. And it's hard for us to grasp that. And God says, I threw out the stars. I named them all. And they're for signs and seasons, so that we can see the glory that God has for us. And that there is a design. And that it did not happen by accident. Do we have any questions? Brother Steve. Let me look at my notes. Yes. Evidence of, I think, intelligence, purpose, and design. I will find it for you after, Brother Steve, the blank. I have to find it. And if that's what she wrote, then it's correct. Order, purpose, and design in nature. Order, purpose, and design in nature. All right. Any other questions? All right. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. 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 Evidence for order. Yes. Yes.